Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Joe and Adam's Hepta podcast. I'm Adam,
I'm Joe.
and
It's
this
a
is our
big smirk on your face.
and this is our Hepta
You must be
podcast, and I'm
stoked about this chapter.
very happy about it. We're currently in a series of episodes going through the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business by Neil Postman from 85. So we are on chapter 9, titled "Go Out and Elect Someone," which I don't know. Did you catch that was a
Reach out
reference to
and elect someone.
reach out? Yes, sorry, reach out and elect someone. Did you realize that was a reference to something? I didn't realize it till I read the
No.
chapter, because it's
No.
apparently a reference to, what did it say? Reach out and touch someone.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. I don't remember where he said that, but
It's near the
yeah,
end.
he did say that.
So this chapter is reach out and elect someone. And to start, I think we wanted to ask the question of the viewers and ask it of ourselves, because so much of this is about television, and specifically this chapter is about television advertising or commercials and what effect they have. So the question would be, what are the advertisements that stick out to you? Which ones do you remember? Which ones can you immediately call to the forefront of your brain and say, that's a commercial? And then I would want to ask, what is that commercial doing? What are they selling? What's the product? And what does that commercial convey about the product? Joe, do you want to give an example of a commercial?
Yeah, sure. The one that came up in my mind, personally, I thought it was a Canine Advantix commercial with the little puppies, and then they're kind of like singing a little song.
Itching, biting, and tapping, whatever it is.
I'm not biting. I'm not itching. How about you? You had to pick one.
Well, there's one of them is just because of Jeopardy, and it's CBS 58. There's this, the guy, I think the weatherman name is like Drew or something, and there's a little jingle that's like, Drew gets me ready for a brand new day, because he like tells people the weather, I guess, and I'm always like singing that. But for products, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the Christmas car commercials, because those really sell a particular thing. And I don't know what's good about the cars necessarily, but I know that people are happy when they get them as a gift. What do you think? The thing about the K9 Advantix, it has a sort of a brain worm in that jingle that gets stuck in your head, because that commercial's been out of circulation for
I know.
a long time.
And I was the one that brought it up, and you maybe knew more words than I did. Like, damn, you knew exactly what I was talking about.
But that's at least somewhat about the product a little bit. I mean, it's a happy puppy and it's a catchy jingle, but it's also like, it's supposed to help with like fleas and ticks. Like, it's no more fleas and ticks. So that's something.
Yeah, it is at least somewhat relevant to the product.
Yeah. And the reason we want to ask people to think about those commercials, think about ones, and then also think about what they mean, what they are, what are they presenting, what are they saying, what do they make you feel, and how does that relate to the product itself, is because in this chapter we're really talking about a particular movement in advertisement that I think Neil Postman and I think Joe and I would see as a harm.
Yeah, and we've already kind of discussed it a little bit in previous chapters, so it was kind of nice to see that come up here.
Yeah, definitely. He says, the television commercial is the most peculiar and pervasive form of communication to issue forth from the electric plug. So I'm just going to read that quick thing to guide us into this. He says, well, first he talks about how many commercials an American adult has seen at this time in the 80s. How many commercials do you think you've seen? Infinite. Way too many.
I'm glad I'm starting to take a hard stance against fuck commercials. Yeah.
Fuck commercials. So he says, we may safely assume, therefore, that the television commercial has profoundly influenced American habits of thought. Certainly, there is no difference in demonstrating that it has become an important paradigm for the structure of every type of political discourse. My, Neil Postman's, major purpose here is to show how it has devastated political discourse. But, he says, there may be some value in my pointing first to its effect on commerce itself, which kind of gets us into our first topic for this chapter. Do you want to read that quote now?
The paraphrase one in the outline here, or the
Yeah.
one on the definition kind of, or tenet put forth in Das Kapital?
Not that one.
Okay.
The paraphrasing one.
Right. So, it's not about the character of the product consumed. It's about the character of the consumers of the product. The fear, fancies, and dreams of who might buy the product. Not what is right about the product, but wrong with the buyer.
And what is
go ahead.
What is that pointing to you? Is there a way you can paraphrase it even more?
Well, like I said, we'd already brought this up in previous chapters a little bit, but it's about a shift in advertising, and which eventually pervades to cultures and reaches even further, but a shift from, I guess, marketing the value of a product to, I guess, the analytical, logical part of the cortex versus the shift to, I guess, targeting what some people call like the mammalian brain, the midbrain, which is kind of where your limbic system is and what drives emotion. So it was found out that it was kind of easier to sell products to people by evoking them emotionally rather than trying to persuade with the quality of the product.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this at length prior to this episode and many other times in the past, especially even with Rico. He has a marketing degree because.
So I'm kind of glad this kind of came up in the book because we've already kind of danced around this topic many times.
Yeah. One of the things Postman says, and I'm paraphrasing it because I don't have it in front of me, but he talks about how a company need not do product research. It need only do market research, which just points to this idea that they need to study the consumer to understand what the consumer wants so they can tap into what the consumer wants to sell them something that is, in many respects, divorced from what they want. So if it is tapping that part of the brain where instead of saying, look how good this blender is, it's really saying like, don't you want to be the family who has a great smoothie in the morning to get you started on your day, and the blender is dishwasher safe, so it's ready for dinner and you can make a puree and look at your happy family and look at all this stuff. And there's parts in there where it's like, oh, it's dishwasher safe. Okay, cool. Like, oh, it has a puree setting. Great. But it's really about this idea of like the productive nuclear family, about getting things done and having a balanced breakfast and being health conscious, and this product, this blender, is your ticket there. Your ticket to a happy nuclear family, to a family dinner, to a good breakfast, early rising, all of those things. Same with a Keurig. It's like it's ready, boom, when you need it, and it's exactly the flavor you want, and now you're ready, everything is fine. And then they also say like there are things about the Keurig that people legitimately preferred about the product. But I wonder what is most effective. I mean, unfortunately, it's probably a combination of everything, but
man, I feel like this is such a huge departure from, I guess, how people used to come with ideas for products. I think it was Steve Jobs or someone like that always mentioned like, you need to tell the consumer what they want. They don't necessarily know what they want. That the idea of market research completely goes against that idea.
It does and it doesn't. I mean, he is tapping into something about like we have to tell them what they want, which is he's not necessarily telling them about a product that they want. He is talking about like emotions there. But maybe he's also pointing to this idea of like the people don't know what they actually want. They don't
Yeah,
know what's going to
I
be emotionally.
got jumbled up in my phrasing there, but yeah, that's kind of more what I meant.
And the market research tells them when you have data in aggregate like that and can, you know, draw things from it, they know more deeply what people want than the people themselves do. And this is even a bigger
Okay, yeah,
problem
sure.
in modern society. So, and that's why it's so effective because you're like, I know I want a new this. I didn't even know I wanted this. And I didn't even know I wanted to feel comfortable in my own home and feel safe. So now I need a Ring door light or I need a thing. Like I didn't even know that I felt uncomfortable until this told me I feel uncomfortable without it. So now I need it. And they found that very profitable way to advertise. What was the thing about Das Kapital you wanted to bring up?
Well, it was just I guess a good basis on what original principle for surrounding commerce and capitalism was before this kind of transition that we're discussing here. The theory states, in part, that competition in the marketplace requires that the buyer not only knows what is good for him, but also what is good. If the seller produces nothing of value, as determined by a rational marketplace, then he loses out. It is the assumption of rationality among buyers that spurs competitors to become winners, and winners to keep on winning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not exactly the case anymore.
Yeah, I guess the reason I found that so interesting is, I guess, given this, some of the conversations that we've had with some
Mhm.
of our liberal friends, that's a kind of statement that I would bring up. That just isn't the case anymore, and I feel like they are operating under that assumption and using it as kind of like a core tenet in their philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing that time and time again, um, among people who I would normally be more aligned me would be I would think more aligned with. But, what are there examples for you that come to mind when that's not the case? Where, like, having an informed buyer, having an honest company making a good product and competition actually being a viable way to, navigate the market?
Hmm. Well, I don't know if this is a great example, but I just think about, I don't want to be like an Apple product hater, but I feel like, at least from an outsider's point of view, I don't really use Apple products, but it seems like they're doing a lot of things that seem to more or less be shafting the consumer and kind of
Mhm.
at least bleeding them dry because they sell very expensive products. Not to say they aren't, still good products. I mean, I'm sure they are. They're expensive, maybe not in ratio to the price. But I don't know. Yeah, they have such brand loyalty at this point that they more or less can just do whatever they want. I would have thought a jumping point would have been when it was found out that they were like releasing software updates to throttle like older models of phones and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there's all these
Yeah.
other little things like getting rid of the headphone jack and making so you can't repair like the phone screen by yourself. You got to take it to an actual store. Or they're like laptop chargers they sell for like $80 or $90, I believe, something really insane. So all these little different things. And now
Yeah.
you told me that the newest AirPods or whatever are, I don't know what the price is. I don't know if you know, but it was something insane.
The AirPod Max are like they're $500.
That's that is bonkers.
Yeah, and now what they did with the iPhone 12, it doesn't come with like a block to plug into the wall for charging. It doesn't come with headphones. Those are all bought separately now,
Hmm.
which their reasoning was they want to save on packaging and everyone already has charger blocks, so we don't need to include one. But then what it doesn't save in packaging, it just makes them more money because they have to repackage those things and people have to buy them individually. And then it's in removing the headphone jack is a great one, which, you know, there was outrage about it and then it quickly went away. And it's like now they sell their they sell their dongle for $10 a piece. And it's like, well, if they would have just kept that headphone jack, they would have made $10 less. So obviously they got to get rid of it and make a little dongle. Yeah, that's a good example.
So I'm not sure as far as marketing what kind of strategies have changed for them. Like I kind of addressed, I see more of just a loyalty in the fan base and maybe more simple a status, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Do you remember the ads early on of this might date us a little bit, but I'm a Mac and I'm a PC. And it was the two guys standing there and one's like disheveled and one's like nice and they talk about all this stuff. So what is that doing? So even in the visual of those two guys who are saying there's something, it's tribalism, and it's also it's a very visual thing of an association of, okay, that guy looks like shit and that's a PC and that guy looks like good and he's saying all this stuff that I like. And so then you're associating with not with the product necessarily, just with the people who are saying they're the product, which is exactly what Postman is talking about. This very visual thing.
Value of products versus making consumers feel valuable.
Yeah. And so I want to be the Mac that looks cool and it talks great, and not the nerdy pocket protecting wearing PC. I want to be the other guy, you know. So this really is selling an idea. And part of this with television is what we talked about in the last couple episodes, is this like the instantaneity of it, the quickness, where it's something where it's like commercials don't last very long. They give you boom, like here's the thing, here's an emotion, here's whatever. I mean, we saw with COVID how many commercials had a slow piano song and it's like, these times are unprecedented and we're working for you and thank you so much for helping us continue, and we're doing this for you and for people who work here, and let's all get through this together and let's all do it. And it's like, oh, that was a Burger King commercial, great. And that's a great example of just selling a particular thing that isn't the product, using marketing to sell something that's very much not the product, but it gets people to buy the product, which is the most important. One of the things we talked about with Postman is he sort of frames television commercials as an enemy of capitalism, anti-capitalism, but that's capitalism as you defined through healthy capitalism and maybe by Das Kapital, based on these principles of having an informed buyer, having an honest thing, having people trying to make good products and inform people about the good products, and then having competition, and then winners win and losers lose and whatever. And I think I said earlier that, not on recording, I said it was sort of short-sighted to say that it was the enemy of capitalism. But I guess I would rephrase that, because I don't know if that's exactly what Postman meant. It's an enemy of the traditional capitalism, but it's great for modern capitalism, or some might say late stage capitalism, or I like to say capitalism run rampant. Really good for industries or individual companies to be able to make a crappy product and sell a lot of it based on selling an idea, because they can just continually cut their bottom line, cut their materials cost, cut the build quality. They can cut all that out, get rid of all of that stuff. And as long as you can convince people that it's still good and it makes you happy and it makes your family happy and it brings your veteran father home and it does all these things, then you're doing great. You're being successful.
I thought of another good example is something like not Bose, Beats.
Yeah.
They're really not good products, and they're marketed at like 4 times the cost they should be at. And that's another one that's, I guess, mostly marketed as a symbol of status. I mean, it's Dre Beats, and yeah.
It's owned by Apple now too, so.
Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, that was a minute ago. That's funny. That's funny.
do we want to move into what this means
Well,
for politics?
before we transition a bit, I did wanted to ask how you felt about, I guess, pharmaceutical advertising, and then also maybe if you're comfortable with that, and then as we transition, whether or not you're comfortable with political advertising, if that's anywhere in the same category for you or not.
I'm not comfortable with pharmaceutical advertising. I'm not comfortable with the pharmaceutical industry being for profit. So the Medicare industry. So
Sure.
that's part of it. And I do draw a distinction between political advertising, maybe. I mean, F all ads. I mean, no to all ads.
Sure.
But political advertisements in theory could be a good thing. But then if I think about it in that way, I mean, there's some people who are saying, well, pharmaceutical advertisements could be a good thing because people might not know that this
Sure.
medicine exists and they might be having this problem and they don't know what to do. So now we're telling them that there's something to help with your eczema or there's something to help with whatever, high
People
blood
got to
pressure.
know.
You got to know. Whether or not that's actually getting them to know anything, whether or not it's actually informing them of anything, other than, hey, this thing exists, maybe not. It will help you or not. But yeah, I don't know. Are advertisements for antidepressants a good thing or a bad thing?
Are you actually asking me, or is that rhetorical?
I'm asking you.
Probably not a good thing.
No.
Well, I would like to think, first of all, that it wouldn't be on just people to be bringing these things up to their physicians. I mean, in a perfect world, a physician would be better on top of these things and would be informed and up to date. And
Yeah. Which also is negating the factor or the variable of pharmaceutical companies paying certain physicians to push certain drugs, and then those physicians favor a particular brand of drug more than other because they get kickbacks from it and all this other nonsense. Okay, so here's what I'll say. In pursuit of informing the public about a particular medication or informing the public about a political candidate, the television commercial is the wrong way to do it. So we want to
absolutely.
we want to hear about medications. We want to know their side effects. We don't just want to hear may cause drowsiness, may cause redness in skin, may contact your doctor if you too fast.
It's just not the medium for those things. Yeah.
Because at the end of every pharmaceutical commercial, it says it may cause diarrhea, it may cause nausea, upset, heart stomach,
Yeah,
all this stuff.
and Neil Postman would obviously heavily agree, and then this would not be the place for things like amongst religion as well. Like we said, it doesn't have that reverence, it doesn't have that level of seriousness, it doesn't have the structure and the time that is.
It doesn't have
for
the
those,
time,
yeah,
the time, and the acknowledgement of reflection, which is something he points to early in the book that we've talked about. So if I'm thinking about politics, like I want people to be informed about what the candidates say and who they are and what their past is and what their positions are and what their goals are for the future if they are elected. But that's too complex for a 60-second TV spot. And so what must it do? If those are the things. I mean, we saw Bloomberg spent so much money on advertising.
Right.
So much. And obviously he didn't do well, but if you are of the camp that he was in there to swing the nomination in a certain way, he was maybe effective. He was maybe successful even. And his ads came out in such rapid succession because of the money behind them that he was addressing things that came out like really, really like recently in a debate. And so Elizabeth Warren says he's a misogynist. Well, then he'll have a commercial the next day about all the women that say great things about him. But then it's like that's not addressing the initial complaint that was brought forth from Elizabeth Warren. It's also just being like, hey, it's great. And so in that way, for pharmaceutical commercials, or for maybe anything, like for like ads, just in the TV ads, internet ads before a YouTube video, they're 15 seconds. There's just not, it's not long enough to actually get informed about anything. It's not informing you anything.
Right. So, I mean, I guess that's been a pretty big point of this whole book, right? That anything that's going to be within, well, as Neil Postman would say, television is a medium, but within this television structure, we have to start being more choosy with what types of content we put up there if it's all going to be entertainified.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess talking about political advertisements, that we can get into that a little bit, because we have talked in the past about the Kennedy Nixon debate, right? How television was such a important factor in that particular debate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in the recent months, we've seen an onslaught, just because it was an election year, an onslaught of political advertisements. And what do they do? Do they tell people about politicians' actual policies that they want to enact? Or do they have an elderly woman sitting at her TV at night, and there's a bad guy knocking at her door, and she tries to call 911? It's a business signal because my opponent defunded the police, so I guess they can't help that
Or
old woman.
maybe there is a summation of their policies, but from the opposition's point of view. They're against this and this and this, and they have a whole list of just like X's of things they're against.
Yeah. I'm remembering a specific one of like this old lady, and someone's trying to break into her house, and she calls 911 and gets like a dial tone, or gets like, oh, there's no police, sorry. And so then what is that selling? Is that having a intellectual and academic in-depth discussion of police reform and judicial reform and police brutality and racial injustice? No, it's just fear-mongering of saying
Fear-mongering,
my opposition wants to get rid of police, and this old lady is going to face bodily harm because of it, and maybe monetary harm as well. And it's a highly effective, right? I mean, I'm sure there are
super effective.
Many an old woman saw that and was like, oh no, the left wants to,
the socialists,
the Marxist radical left. And on the left, candidates do that too. They'll say, for the recent Georgia races, they'll say, look at Kelly Loeffler's, is it Kelly? Look at Loeffler's, look at how much money she makes. She's a billionaire. She doesn't know what it's like to live in this. Look at the corruption. Look at the stock trading before the market crash of coronavirus. Look at the companies this Purdue is associated with. And they're saying, look at that corruption. Do you want that to be your representative in the Senate? So they are trying to do that. But on both sides, they try to do the positive things, or the things that their constituents will like about themselves too. So I think about Brian Kemp in Georgia for his gubernatorial race. He had this whole horrible commercial about, he was like, I'll get in my truck and round up illegals myself. And like, that's okay. So he's talking about what he would do, and he's sort of talking about his immigration policy, but he's also like saying something that his constituents would agree with, and be like, yeah, we should round up illegals ourselves and whatever. And even using the word illegal in that way is a particular kind of marketing, a particular kind of messaging that both sides succumb to. Except I think, from my experience, one side is quote unquote usually more honest than the other. And unfortunately, the honest politician doesn't win elections. The politician who's honest in their commercial does poorly, it seems.
I'm hoping that will start to change, especially with how podcasts are kind of starting to take over. I mean, just look at, if you just take an example for Joe Rogan, how he has a lot of people involved in government on his podcast now. Like, I mean, regardless of how you feel about Andrew Yang, I'm curious to see what all of his like activity on various different podcasts will do for him in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, and it's not about video. It's not about recording. It's not about cuz long form things where people can have in-depth discussions about complex issues and present their things. Those are happening and they're good. Are they happening at large to the pervasiveness of ads? No. And are they as effective? Well, I'd like to think so, but I'm skeptical. Postman talks about how he's referring to Jacob Javits in a race in New York when he lived there, I guess, with Ramsey Clark, of whose campaign he was associated with. And he says of Javits, he knew full well in what century we are living in. He understood that in a world of television and other visual media, political knowledge means having pictures in your head more than having words. And he said his insight wouldn't fail him. He went on to win that election pretty handedly. So it's about having the idea of something. It's not about the actual content of a policy. It's about having an idea of the policy. We also talked about earlier about slogans. So if we're talking about the Canine Advantage jingle, it's catchy, gets in your head, tells you something about the product, and now it's interesting. It's a cute dog. But we also have political sloganizing. We have a slogan making, I should say. We have political jingles in that way that are incredibly effective. I think anybody in the audience can think of examples for that. And that's so dangerous to discourse, because if discourse devolves into 3-word phrases, build the wall, lock her up, drain the swamp, Medicare for all, if that's what and some of those things I think are good and some of those things are bad, but if that's what political discourse becomes, and it seems to be that way, Stop the Steal, that's another one, that's really bad for discourse about politics. And it's just totally reshaping what it means to be informed, which we've talked about in the past. What does being informed mean? Does it mean seeing the advertisements, or does it mean scrolling through itemized lists of policy after policy and listening to them long form talk and hearing them out and judging it not based on party, judging it for what it is and thinking about it and analyzing how would that affect me? How would that affect other people? What are the outcomes of that? But that's too much for the television culture.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you were going to segue there to kind of see how this television has, as a medium and its structure, has started to pervade television altogether, and now its effects it's having on culture as a whole, and just we as beings in a civilized society, talking about this refusal to remember and how we interface with history and how knowledgeable people are about history, and do people even look back in history anymore? I don't know. When we make everything into sound bites and all these different small segments, we start to lose all the context that comes before. Like you said, we're no longer really learning anymore. It's just what's the next thing and move on.
Yeah.
So the historian Karl Shorsky has, in my opinion, circled closer to the truth by noting that the modern mind has grown indifferent to history because history has become useless to it. In other words, it is not obstinacy or ignorance, but a sense of irrelevance that leads to the diminution of history.
Yeah. It's another thing for people to think about if they're listening, is that what do they know about history? What in their quote unquote history classes, what did they learn? And how selective is that? And what was it trying to?
Probably quite selective. I don't know if the kind of history that's taught now for like K through 8 and stuff is the same as we were, back then. I like to hope it's a little different. I hope it doesn't keep trending into the direction of Trump wanting to employ teaching American exceptionalism everywhere.
Yeah.
What I got as far as history class in my last 2 years here at UNR was actually quite good. And it was enjoyable from the perspective of some pretty scathing critiques of colonial America.
Yeah,
There were
yeah,
some students that he gave some examples of some students even walking out of his class because it sounded like our professor just apparently hates America because he was so critical.
love that, love that.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
great professor.
Here's an idea. If we're talking about selling something, an emotion, for example, what emotions or feelings is our history trying to send us? You know, what is the goal of history? Is the goal of history teaching or an acknowledgement of history to inform about the nuances and all the context from all the different players that in play about what happened? Or is it to kind of provoke a certain inclination in the people? So if we talk about the USSR, or if we talk about Germany, or if we talk about China, or we talk about Central America, or we talk about pre-America, you know, in the indigenous people, what is it trying to do? Is it trying to make, is it trying to justify and saying, well, slavery, yeah, it was really bad, but it was instrumental in constructing this great nation, the best planet on ever, you know, lived. What is history lessons trying to sell us? What is it? What emotion is it trying to pay on? What favors of the or what uses of the mind does it favor?
Are you talking about like ideally or how it kind of is now?
How it is.
We're teaching kids American exceptionalism, then we
Yeah.
can see what that's preying on. But
But any age, and just as a concept of history and anyone's passing knowledge of it, you know, what things do they remember in their refusal to remember or in their selective memory? What are those things and what do they point to? Because they're probably organized in a particular way that makes them relevant, significant to that person's daily life. And so it's useful to them to think about Confederacy as heritage. I mean, what do you think about refusal to remember? Do you have a good concept of history?
I really do not.
Me neither.
You say
And what
that, but at least I get satisfactory responses when I ask you questions, and you can give me at least based off what you know, whether you want to call it well informed or not. But at least what I asked you before about this 1950s transition in marketing from
Yeah.
actually marketing the product to kind of focusing on the human psyche, and I did like what you had to say about it. You were able to put it in the context of well, I guess the example you gave was like the microwave, and maybe people were suspect about it. So in order to market it to people, we didn't teach them the science of the microwave. We focused more on the emotional impacts and telling them that it was safe to use.
Yeah. Yeah. Our concept of history and what it does for politics, especially in the age of television, is really worrisome. I think part of the reason is because if Postman talks like we talked about in the past about the peekaboo world or the now this, if history is removed from context, if it's just this point in history, this point in history, this point in history,
Well,
we're
yeah,
not
and we have to look at all the
thread.
history that Neil Postman has used to support his argument in this book. I mean, talking about typographic America and all that, and the typographic mind, without recounting for that, this argument wouldn't necessarily be the same or be as strong.
Yeah. And thinking about topography, I think that can bring us sort of to the end of this, where we get back to Orwell and Huxley, where Postman basically says like history, books are history. Books topography is inherently from the past. It's not what's being said on television, which is inherently the present. It has to be the present. It's automatically something is it just an axiom of books of topography that it's happened in the past and it's recalling the past, and so it's historical, it's history. And he's saying television is opposed to that. It's actually the opposite of that. And saying television is very instantaneous. It's very, very present because that's what it has to do. And so this leads him into a conversation about Orwell, which we've talked about in the past, or Huxley. And in Orwell, they burned books and they got rid of what is the history there. It's not Newspeak, but it's like the Ministry of Culture. There's like something in Orwell that's like, do you know what it is?
What, doublespeak?
A doublespeak, or is there something specifically referencing history that's beside burning books?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that was
But
it.
then what we've sort of brushed on it, but do you want to give a little, because you've read them both. I've only read Brave New World. I'm just familiar with 1984. Can you talk about those differences in regards to history and censorship, even in the framework of what Postman says about it?
If you feel that's necessary, I hope the viewers have a pretty good idea of that at this point, especially with the really brilliant foreword that we read all
Yeah,
of,
oh yeah.
which perfectly outlines, the differences between those two philosophies.
Oh, you know what? We didn't talk about this beforehand, but I just thought it was interesting to talk about like politicians as entertainers. If politics is now has to be entertainment, this was the era of Reagan, who was an actor before he was a governor, before he was president. And I wonder if any of those examples are still around today. If we have any recent examples of a quote unquote entertainer or a celebrity making their way into the political sphere.
Well, Kanye is going to be running eventually. I'm pretty sure he's definitively said he was planning to, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know if this is still happening, but it sounded like The Rock was alluding to running for president pretty definitively. Maybe not in the next election, maybe the one after, but I don't know. I think I've maybe asked this in our group chats before. What is the effect of the Trump presidency going to have on our candidates? Because people always thought, oh, we got this guy. He's not a politician. He's a businessman, and he came off of running reality TV shows. And now after what we've seen, which is more or less been, I guess, a train wreck these last few years, are people going to be less inclined to choose an entertainer? Or now is this kind of the opposite, where this is the floodgates? Because now that we've seen Trump can get up there, now there's going to be a lot of people that are gaining confidence and think, oh, I can get up there too. So this is really just the beginning.
Yeah, that surprised me about The Rock, because I don't see The Rock as actually doing that. I don't think he's narcissistic enough, or even if he thinks he could win, right? I don't think he's someone to be. For some reason, I have an opinion of him that he's humble enough to be like, I can't solve the world's problems. I can't solve Americans' problems. Like, even if he thinks he has the cult of personality to win and he has the fan support to win, I don't know if he's actively being like, I have the answers.
But you don't necessarily have to. You just have to have the ability to parse through with all the brilliant people you're working with, right? Ideally, you'd be listening to a lot of really knowledgeable people, and your responsibilities as president would be, I don't know. Some people like to put president on a pedestal and thinks he does everything, but that is obviously not the case, nor should it be.
Do we have to explain in depth, complicated policy positions about climate change, or about nuclear proliferation, or about immigration policy, or infrastructure? Do we want to talk about all the intricacies of that thing? Or do we want to tell the people that we have the solution? We know how to do those things. You want to sell them that you can do those things, and you're able to, and you want to, and you know the best. So you don't want to actually sell them on what the product is, what the ideas are. You want to sell them the idea that you are able to do those things.
Okay, so like Postman did talk about it at the beginning. It's like It was like virtue signaling versus actually having virtue.
Yeah. It's just about the fears, the fancies, and dreams of who the constituency are. Not about what the policies actually mean.
I mean, ideally, from someone in a position like that, we would want a high level of transparency. So that's the true way or a good.
Transparency, competency. I would like someone with yes, we want someone who is an expert, who they might not know the intricacies of international trade policy, but we want them to consult with economists or financial advisors who do, and then they take that and figure out what's best for the public, not what's best for them or their friends. We're getting kind of close to the end of the chapter here.
Yeah, before we get to closing statements, I guess I kind of wanted to leave it up to you because I know there's sort of two things that come up here towards the end of the chapter that both coincides maybe with your pathway of thinking, and then the last paragraph gives a nice little statement to sum up the chapter a little bit, but also brings up censorship. So I mean, there's that part in page 140, I know, where Postman talks about that he's much more afraid of corporate America rather than in tyrannical government. If you wanted to comment on that, because I know that's something you've talked about a lot.
Yeah. What are you more afraid of, Joe?
I don't know. I am in the middle.
Yeah. So I have in the past, in my private life, talked at length about my issues with the corporate state and the industrial state.
How do you feel about? Well, you mentioned you didn't know if The Rock was narcissistic enough to maybe be in a position like that. So how do you feel about the kind of person that the presidency draws versus the kind of person that a business owner and entrepreneur kind of draws? So someone like previous friends we've had, and then I guess like Big Daddy Bezos and Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, it's largely a thing where like sometimes people think like, well, the person who would be best at being the president doesn't want to do it because they don't want the stress or don't want this. So there's a particular kind of person that it draws. Same with industry. I mean, if we look at, there's that whole like study about, what's the word? Not a, like a sociopath, not a psychopath, but like sociopaths, if they have sociopathic tendencies, where are they drawn to? Are they drawn to be doctors or lawyers or politicians or heads of state, or are they trying to be, CEOs or CFOs or something like that? And what does that mean? They can draw similar people. The outcome is slightly different. And then I tend to think, because I'm not confident in the purchasing power or the boycott power of the public to actively have an impact on private industry, like we're supposed to in Das Kapital and capitalism, as it's meant to be and what they like to say it is. You're supposed to be able to stop someone from doing bad things or running a company poorly or making a bad product based on not buying it, right? And can be getting other people to not buy it. But I'm very lacking in confidence about our ability to actually do that. So I am more afraid of a corporate government or corporate tyranny, because from my experience, there is no oversight. And the argument that the oversight is in our purchasing power, I don't subscribe to that argument. I don't buy it. So if we talk about Parler or Twitter or Facebook censoring people, and the argument is, well, it's a private industry, you don't have to use their service, make your own service to do that. I'm concerned that we're at a loss. There's nothing we can do. And you'd say, well, maybe they would do something that is enough to make people leave in such quantities that it hurts them economically. But I don't know what that thing is. And so I don't like the idea. I mean, I tend to be optimistic and idealistic in thinking that we still do, in some semblance, have oversight and an active
because that's obviously what would be my next question.
Participation in the government. I'd like to think that we can change the government if we want to. and he says like our last vestige of hope is through our measly vote, and even that might not be enough, but I remain that is at least more tangible to me, it appears, than doing so via purchasing power.
Well, guess we can segue into the last point here. I don't know if we wanted to touch on censorship here. He didn't really go into it much, but
No.
censorship is a common topic that comes up between us.
Yeah. Well, he brings it up in context of like history as books. Burning books is censorship. In Orwell, they burn books. In Huxley, books aren't even a thing.
Orwell had history on his side, and he still wasn't quite right. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. And how we can tie censorship back into television culture and discourse and advertisements and everything is it may be one way we discussed information. I mean, there is censorship by active authoritative or like deletion of things. There is burning books, right? But then there's another kind of censorship that Huxley outlined and that Postman is worried about. It's almost like lying by omission, or by, the news only shows you what it shows you, and it has its own reasons for showing it, its own biases by being on television. And the stuff that it's not showing you, or the stuff that they're not showing you in a particular way, is another form of censorship. So if we can keep you entertained, we're not only censoring all the other things that wouldn't entertain you, we're actually also censoring things by not presenting things truthfully. It's almost more insidious form of censorship, because if something's deleted, you can say like objectively, okay, that's no longer there. But if something's just left out and you never even knew if it was there or not, then you can keep being strung along. And that form of censorship, as Postman ends the chapter, this sort of censorship by entertainment, by keeping the things we want censored so far from the people, not by getting rid of them, but by making them either boring or drab, or making other things so much more important and entertaining and so much more fun. That's actually maybe more dangerous than just getting rid of it. Huxley feared that no one would care to read a book, and Orwell feared that there'd be no books, right? Huxley feared that just who would want to read amusing ourselves to death? There's TV to watch.
All right, well, I'm going to read this quote then. Seems like a good segue. Yep. Last page, 141, last paragraph. Censorship, after all, is the tribute tyrants pay to the assumption that a public knows the difference between serious discourse and entertainment, and cares. How delighted would be all the kings, czars, and Führers of the past and commissars of the present to know that censorship is not a necessity when all political discourse takes the form of a jest. Yeah, that very much. Wow, it did. Huxley get a lot of things right.
Oh boy. Oh boy. And when I read it the first time, which was somewhat recently, I didn't even realize that that's like, because there's so much in there about like, the way they make babies and all they sleep, listen to stuff, and there's all this stuff. So it's like get the actual thing gets drowned out. Like the stuff that Postman is talking about actually doesn't come to the forefront. And I wonder.
Yeah, I would like to give that book another read. I didn't, I don't know. My level of being entertained when reading it is just purely a novel. Wasn't super high. But as I got through like sections of the book and I just sat there and thought about some of the ideas that were in there, is more what piqued me. Is also what makes the book kind of timeless at this point. It's just some of the ideas that are in there, but it's purely a fictional reading experience. Wasn't totally for me.
Yeah, it wasn't amusing enough.
Apparently not.
And maybe
but I love talking about it.
Yeah. Well, it ends on another mic drop from Postman, and I'm really excited for the next couple chapters. I think you
Yeah.
are too.
I mean, I didn't read them yet, but going off the titles, the next one is teaching as an amusing activity, which I'm excited to get into because I'm hoping that well, like we said, he's been very pretty one-sided in his arguments, and I'm hoping he can give somewhat an acknowledgement of amusement and entertainment and how that can perhaps be beneficial in certain ways for being informed, learning, etc.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to that. Hope anybody watching or listening is too. It's going to be some good stuff, and then we have some good plans for once we finish this series, and have more plans for the future. So that was chapter 9 of Amusing Ourselves to Death, and this was Joe and Adam's Hapta podcast. Thanks for listening and watching.
Sweet.
I'm Adam.
I'm Joe. Thanks for listening. That was a good one. I enjoyed talking about that.
Yeah, a little long still.